Hello, and welcome to week 9 concept recording. The concepts we're covering this week, and this is the last week of content, are human abuse and violence, cultural influences, and nursing. I'm going to share my screen and bring up our PowerPoint that you have in your week 9 announcement. Okay, these are your readings. You have readings from your Med-Surg book this week, chapter 45. With pages 1051 through 1054. And then you have a couple of chapters in your fundamentals book. Chapter 3, legal and ethical aspects of nursing, pages 35 to 41. And then you have the entire chapter of cultural and spiritual aspects of patient care. You do have the PowerPoint from your readings from the chapter in your module, so you can pull that up. So human abuse and violence and cultural influences in nursing. Okay, what do we know? What do we want to know about human abuse and violence? Okay, we know that violence is a maladaptive coping mechanism, right? We know that violence is very common in vulnerable populations, as is substance abuse as a means of exhibiting or regaining control. We know that violence is predictable and thus preventable if we both look at victims and perpetrators of violence, right? People who become involved in violence typically have a previous exposure to some sort of violence. Abusers were often beaten when they were children or witnessed siblings or one of their parents being beaten, right? They learn, abusers learn that violence is a way to manage conflict. Okay, we know that high levels of violence are tied to health disparities and adverse health outcomes. Nurses are mandatory reporters. Okay, we must report any kind of violence against children or elders and or vulnerable adults. Okay, physical neglect. We talked about this in one of our quiz questions last week. Refers to the failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, hygiene, or necessary medical care. And then emotional neglect refers to the omission of basic nurturing, acceptance, and caring for essential health, growth, and development. Kids who are exposed to violence, whether they're victims or witnesses, are at high risk for mental disorders, self-harm, substance abuse, and potential attempted or completed suicide. We know that abuse is about power and control. And all the methods of abuse are about control. Family violence is violence between the most powerful against the least powerful. Kids that are exposed to violence are prone to frequent headaches, stomach aches, bedwetting, anxiety, depression, withdrawal behavior, maybe inappropriate sexual behavior or knowledge. Let's talk about intimate partner homicide. Top risk factor for intimate partner homicide is a previous domestic violence episode, right? Other factors that contribute to intimate partner homicide, maybe access to guns, estrangement, threats to kill or threats with a weapon, non-fatal strangulation. Okay, we know that abused, just going through the intimate partner homicide we just talked about. We know that when we suspect any kind of abuse in an adult, right, we need to try and ask non-judgmental questions to try and give the victim the opportunity to share or report without feeling shame. We know that elders are at risk for any kind of violence, including physical, emotional, financial abuse, as well as neglect. Right? What is emotional abuse? What might be noticed with the elderly? right? We may notice behaviors from the abuser to demean or affect the self-esteem of the elder, maybe name calling, scaring them, embarrassing them, destroying their property, not letting the person see family or friends. Right? We know that elder neglect occurs when basic needs for food, housing, clothing, medical care are not met. Maybe the elder is feeling a fear of abandonment, that if they don't adhere to what the abuser is doing, they fear of being abandoned. Suicide. We know suicide is self-directed violence. It is the second leading cause of death in young adults, ages 10 to 34. Some leading risk factors for suicide are depression and any other mental disorders or substance abuse disorders. Other risk factors may include prior suicide attempt, family history of suicide, mental disorder, substance abuse, history of violence, having firearms in the home, maybe incarceration of a family member. Maybe they've been exposed to the suicidal behavior of others, maybe family members, peers. Primary prevention, some strategies for primary prevention with regards to violence, right? Maybe we have school-based education programs on coping mechanisms, teaching parents good coping skills, anger management programs, home visitation programs for families that are at high risk for violence. We know that parents with low social support maybe have a tendency towards depression, have multiple stress factors, and a history of abuse. They are actually at risk of abusing their own children, right? Abusive parents often have unrealistic expectations of a child's developmental abilities. Moving on to cultural influences in nursing, which is the second concept to be covered today. We know that culture is everything we believe to be true about the world. Those are what cultures are made up of. Cultures are a set of beliefs, values, and assumptions about life that we pick up through socialization as a child. Culture encompasses a wide variety of behaviors between cultures: language, touch, personal space, body language, perceptions on health, perceptions on end of life care. These are all different depending on the culture you're working with. We know that each culture separately influences the family structure. It influences childbearing practices, time orientation. We've talked about that. Some cultures are past oriented, present oriented, and future oriented. And that is the explanation of each and examples of each are in your reading. How do we develop cultural competence? We've talked about cultural competence throughout the entire term, right? We must, as nurses, approach each patiently as completely unique and learn the patient's culture through observation and assessment. We must also understand our own cultural beliefs, and we must avoid passing on judgment, stereotyping, having biases. We've talked about this several times. This term is understanding one's own feelings towards different cultures and vulnerable populations. We can seek out community leaders. We talked about a little bit about this last week, trusted community leaders, right? They can assist us as the community nurse as an entry point with different cultures within our community. They can help us develop plans, programs to help meet the needs of these culturally diverse populations we have within our community. They know best how to reach their community and the culture in a culturally appropriate manner. How do we work with how do we work with cultures that are non-English speaking? How do we communicate? Well, suggestions in working with this population may include communication tools in the targeted language of a specific population, such as radio ads, newspaper articles, radio announcements, flyers, all in their native language. I did this a lot in the schools. I think I talked about this last week with immunizations. Reaching parents of non-English speaking parents on the importance of immunization, where they can go to get immunizations, free clinics. We always have to maintain an open and objective attitude towards individuals and their cultures. We have to avoid seeing all cultures as being alike, being aware of our own cultural beliefs, and avoid projecting our beliefs, our own cultural beliefs, onto others. Cultural awareness is a self-examination and exploration of our own biases and prejudices that we may have towards different vulnerable populations, different cultures, right? If we lack this, if we lack our cultural knowledge and competence, it may create a feeling of helplessness for us as we're trying to care for these populations. To develop cultural competence, we need to be sensitive to the cultural implications during each encounter, avoid stereotyping based on race and ethnicity. We need to ask questions to stimulate learning about the client's culture, avoid making assumptions about nonverbal clues from clients from unfamiliar cultures. We have to continue discovering, learning about various cultures, right? So that we can use the specific culture's values, beliefs, and practices as part of their healthcare plan. So that's how we develop cultural competence. We'll talk more about both of these concepts in class, but that's an introduction to both concepts from this week. Okay, thanks.